We move from child into young adulthood, through adolescence. There's a transformation there. We move out of school, there's a transformation there. We move from school into our first job, into our next relationship, into our marriage, or having children, or traveling the world, or going through menopause, or having a midlife crisis, or death, or whatever it is that our entire life is made up of just a continuous series of transitions.
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man. He'll unpack wisdom and insights from a cross-section of top quality performers in business, media, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle to uncover key elements to help you live your best audacious life ever. So without further ado, here is the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations, folks. It's Audley Stevenson, and you've got it locked to the Audacious Living Podcast. Thank you so much for being here, and it's always an absolute pleasure to share and bring you another episode of the most audacious podcast the internet has to offer. And really what you're doing is helping us continue our ongoing goal of helping our listeners live their best audacious lives ever. Now, this is episode 201, and I've got Paula Conroy stopping by, hailing all the way from the land down under in Australia to engage in a delightful conversation about the transformation journey that we all go through to bring ourselves to a better place at some point in time. Paula is a transformational expert. She's a leader who supports women to make that move from one stage of life to the next in a really healthy way. And I assure you that it won't take long for you to pick up on Paula's passion and energy. There's no question that she absolutely loves doing the work she does, almost as much as I love doing this podcast. So I'm absolutely certain that you're going to enjoy this. Now that we're set and we've got things all laid out and the table is made, we're going to turn this conversation over to Paula. Enjoy. Hey, Paula, thank you for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you on a guest. Thank you for making the time like this.
Oh, Audley, thank you so much. I'm always loving these podcasts that I'm doing with people in America because we're at very different times of our days. So I'm just starting my day here in Australia and you're just ending yours. And there's always something curious about the shifting energies between those two different times of days. So it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. And I'm in Canada. So there you go.
You're in Canada. So
we go all the way in Canada, Toronto, Canada area. And so it's great to chat with you like this. And I love the idea that the shifting energies, because we're two different perspectives, but you look so bright and cheery. You would never know, that we're at the same. We're two different ends. We're at the same point in time, which to me really suggests how connected we all are, right?
Yeah.
You are on the other side of the planet, literally, and
yeah.
We are talking and we're connecting on topics that are mutually important to us and significant. So this is great. Thank you for doing this. This is awesome.
No, it's fantastic. I totally agree with you. I'm a South African. I grew up in South Africa and then I moved to London for many years and I now live in Australia. And so for me, connecting to my family and friends back in the middle of the world, or the middle of the world according to you, the European world map, because I know the American map's got America in the middle of the world. There is this real sense of difference between the feeling sense, the frequency of each of those different times of day. So, there's always something curious for me about how we merge them together. And as you've so beautifully put already, this experiential journey we can have of our connectedness, our interconnectedness around the world. I love it. It's really, really cool.
We undoubtedly will circle back to the topic of connectedness in a moment. I'm certain of that as we start our chat here. But where I wanted to get us going is really on your topic of expertise, which I love. I read somewhere you said that we all have to make a transformational journey. So maybe let's start there as a starting point in terms of this journey that we all have to make, and what are we transforming into, and where do we end up, and obviously the work that you do as well.
Yeah, fantastic. No, Audley, you're quite right. I mean, if we just think objectively about everybody's lives, ourselves included, is that the whole way through our life, we think in linear time that we're moving from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. But time doesn't really work like that. Time works in a much more cyclical manner. It's much more arising from the present moment and emerging from now into the next moment of now. Yes. And when I think about my own life and our journey as human beings, we get born into the world and we emerge in a certain way, and then we continuously keep growing and emerging into this next version of ourselves, a little bit older, a little bit wiser, a little bit more experienced. We move from child into young adulthood, through adolescence. There's a transformation there. We move out of school, there's a transformation there. We move from school into our first job, into our next relationship, into our marriage, or having children, or traveling the world, or going through menopause, or having a midlife crisis, or death, or whatever it is that our entire life is made up of just a continuous series of transitions. And, this concept of transitioning, I feel like when we get to a certain stage of being adults, we sort of think we have to have it all worked out by then. We kind of stop our learning. We stop our growing. We're like, well, I'm grown up now and I know what's going on and I need to do these things and I need to make this money and I need to do this in the world. And we forget about this possibility of constantly transitioning into more of what we already are, like more experiential journey of our life here on planet Earth. And so in many ways, we start missing out on the mystery and the magic of what it means to be in a continuously expanding, growing phase of our lives, which is forever. Growing is forever. And so when I looked at this, from a sort of broader concept, just like we've discussed now, into sort of the micro changes that happen, I went through a big transition in my own life where I moved from one particular way of being. I'd worked in corporate banking for 15 years. I'd managed big multi-jurisdictional teams. I'd looked after global multinationals for a very long time and was highly skilled in what I did. And yet this transitioning being within me, like the inner me, knew that there was something else calling for me, something else that was meant to be my own. That transition was very, very palpable. I could feel that's from this sense of agitation that was happening within me. And so I went on a transition from this whole way of being in this one particular life of corporate banking through a rite of passage into another way of being, which is how I'm living my life now. And it was in that process of transitioning from one stage of the life to the next that I recognized that there were so many ways in which I and we don't do these transitions as well as they can be done. We land up not necessarily letting certain things get left behind and to die in that old way of being. We don't necessarily go through the discomfort of that in-between stage of not knowing. Often we're in one stage of life and we feel the discomfort and we say to ourselves, oh, geez, something needs to change. I'm just going to jump from this autumn where the leaves are falling from my tree straight to spring and plant something new. And we forget that there is the winter that is a necessary part of every cycle of life, every cycle of nature. So moving through that winter, something a lot of us are not actually that keen or willing to do, because winter is this dark, it's insular, it's colder, it's more alone. There's, very important but seemingly difficult, challenging, negative, and I say negative in inverted commas because, our minds think it's not a good thing. Right. And yet it's an absolutely necessary component of this nature of the cycle of life and in living in a dual existence of, if we're going to be in the summer or in the joy, there is also this corresponding winter that needs to happen to create the possibility of the summer. And the summer needs to transition into the winter to allow for that cycle to integrate and gestate within us. So in that transition for me from, what was an autumn in my life, trying to jump into a spring, instead of recognizing that there was this important journey that I needed to go on that was going to touch on this winter time, this dark time, this insular time. And as a human being on planet Earth, I recognize that we don't teach ourselves. We don't teach one another in schools or in our cultures or in our communities how to actually be in the darkness of that phase and do it well and understand that darkness of the winter, of that transition, is a necessary part of the cycle. And like all things, this too shall pass. And when we put certain processes and practices like we do in Rites of Passage, I facilitate transformational Rites of Passage processes for women and for parents and children transitioning into young adulthood. And I've recognized that when we bring the structure that holds that ancient wisdom that is inherent in these practices and processes of sitting in circle and telling our story, community gathering around, bringing our awareness to the fact that this winter is necessary and it needs to happen, going through the necessary deaths that need to happen, of the death to the old, in order to make the space for this new to be reborn within us. And being able to then come out and be recognized not only by others for our unique gifts and talents, but also being able to connect to, in that letting go of the things that do not serve us anymore. We've laid rise for the possibility of us being able to connect more deeply with those parts that are our unique gifts and talents. Each and every one of us has this beautiful essence to give out into the world. And so many of us are disconnected from it, So to allow ourselves to go through that winter and then come out into this new stage, once we've gone through that rite of passage, is so unbelievably supportive for all of us to be able to transition through these inevitable growing stages of our life. And I'm not going to say from one to the next to the next, I'm going to say continuously growing through the stages of our life, and to be able to do it really well. Yeah.
I'm smiling as you're speaking, because so much of what you say resonates with me, and as you're talking about the different seasons, I so love the idea that you use the seasons as the analogy for us to understand that one is necessary. So you've got to make that step. So it's almost like, and maybe you've been in these situations where you kind of look back at your life and you go, okay, wait a second. I went here, but if I didn't go there, then I wouldn't have been able to do here. So that first step was necessary, although it may have been painful, it may have been comfortable, I didn't like it. Maybe I felt like I was forced to have to do it. It was still necessary, because you would have gotten to point A to point B. So I needed to get there to get to point C, as an example. And so the word acceptance comes to mind. And when we say acceptance, we're acceptance, embracing, owning it, all of these things I feel are necessary components to on that. And some of the transformational, I think it's a journey. And then so for me, I think the best way to visualize what we're talking about here, Paula, is that life is a journey, and you're gonna have the hills and you can have the valleys, but it's all part of the necessary part of the process, from what I'm hearing you clearly say. So thank you for that, because that's just simply wonderful.
Yeah, beautiful. I think you've hit the nail on the head. And that whole piece about acceptance is often where so many of us get stuck. We have this sort of media coming at us saying, live in your bliss and be in your joy, and, do what makes you happy and practice gratitude every day. And, all of these are really beautiful, important components, but what I experienced was that in that conditioning in my mind, that's how I needed to live, there was a lack of knowing and also ability to actually go into the things that needed to die in order to allow for me to be intuitively and inherently connected to my joy, not telling myself I needed to be joyful, not being grateful, not writing my gratitude every day on the list while still having this feeling of discontent or unease. And what I noticed was that when I started unpacking that, going like, why is it that I'm not living in my joy? It was because there had not necessarily been the darkness of the winter to give me the possibility and the space and the permission to go into those difficult feelings for all these parts. I had to walk away, I chose to walk away from a 15-year career that gave me financial stability. There was a lot of, probably now in hindsight, looking at it, unhealthy codependence to a certain degree on feeling like I was someone important, and having this codependency on other people in the organization, my teams who reported to me, depend on me. So there was a need in me that was only getting satiated from this outside environment, this big job title, this identity, this the other people needing me, all of those things. I was like, I need these things in order to find myself and be in my own truth and have my own self-worth and value myself, is because of all these outside things. But to come to that realization that, wow, I'm placing my power outside of myself here because I'm dependent on something that's outside of me, and all of these things that I'm clinging to in order to try and stay happy and write my gratitude list, and so it was like, oh, wow, slow it down. Something needs to actually, I have to die to this person that is needing those things. And I have to grieve with her and hold her dear and look after her and care for her while she goes through a necessary but challenging death of her old self, of her old identity, of all these things that she's been working on and for and to, and not be able to be in that discomfort of being with her while she doesn't know what's next, that darkness of the passage. You're just talking about taking that next step. It was like the staircase was not showing itself. There was hardly even another step on which to step on. It was like, before you step onto that next step, you have to stay here in the darkness of the gestation of all that needs to fall from the trees in the winter, in the autumn into the winter, so that it can fully compost and you can feel those difficult experiences of having been on a certain path, living in a certain direction, being attached to a certain future, having a particular idea about how life was going to be, having this security blanket of financial income and routine. And, all of that needs to die in the healthiest way while you hold yourself dear and let yourself be laid into the composting, so that this newness that is dying to emerge within you has got the space to be able to shine through. Because until you've done that, you can't keep trying to write your gratitude list when there's no space, because it's all still being taken up with all these things you're attached to try and not feel alone or sad or griefful, So I hear what you're saying. Only once that part of me had gone through its healthy death and I'd felt all the difficult feelings, did that next clear step present itself on, right, this is the next step. The staircase is not showing yet, and it probably never will. Maybe 3 or 4 or 5 steps might come into view at times, but ultimately it doesn't matter as long as you can trust that when that step appears, that you're aware enough and awake enough in the moment to recognize that it's appeared and that you can actually now take that next step into the newness, and you're going to do that well.
As you talk, I've got this image of this caterpillar, birthing into a butterfly, stepping into something new. I think such a beautiful image, and it properly illustrates, what we're talking about. And as well, too, there's, at least from my perspective, I think there's a general excitement about this new feeling, this new step that we're moving towards, and not embracing that it's almost like we're robbing ourselves of an opportunity to feel these feelings, and it's, I truly believe that the quality of life vastly improves when we can find something to look forward to and get excited about on a regular basis, if not a daily basis. And if we can do that and feel that change, that transformation, be excited about it regularly, life just seems rosier and happier and much more fulfilling.
Oh, I totally agree. And it's like, how do we connect to that joy, that those interests that light us up and turn us on, the ones that really get our juices flowing when they present and appear in our lives. And it's just this culture that we have been born into and that has evolved over however long, has created this structure of, at first expansion, but then of real muted sameness. There's this real sense of, you go to school and you learn in this way, and these are the things that you learn, and then you go out and you do this next thing, and you do this next thing, and you do this next thing, and in all of that, it's almost as though, like you've said, we've been robbed to a certain degree by our collective co-creation of our culture to have the possibility of really being able to connect to that part of ourselves that knows what our unique gifts and talents are and understands how to bring those back out into the world. And, so much of that breakdown happens in those adolescent years, so the part of the work I do, I work with children transitioning into young adulthood with either their parent or their carer. And we run these rites of passage camps for the parent and the child. And the purpose of that is to put the child through, it's almost like that butterfly example that you've used, that dissolution into caterpillar soup, or going through the birth canal when we first get born. We get compressed through this passageway, this birth canal, as we're coming out into this next phase of being in the world. And, when we go through adolescence, we have that next big hormone surge where we're actually going into a transformation. Our whole bodies are transforming into the next stage. And yet we don't create the necessary birth canals for these adolescents to be able to push against something in that emergence, that butterfly, to push against the cocoon. There's a necessary, equal and opposing force that we're invited to in every witness that we have of nature, even ourselves being born into this world, that requires in order for us to through, quite literally. And that possibility in our modern day culture is not readily available. Our communities and our cultures don't necessarily create, many do. Lots of indigenous cultures still create that rite of passage for their young children or old children transitioning into adults. But in Western culture, we don't really do it. So it's
almost like ceremonial. It's
absolutely
ceremonial sort of event, if you will. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas
totally.
We just sort of, we just go by
carry on.
Yeah, carry on.
We just carry on. It's like we just keep carrying on. With no real marking of these contractions and expansions that we have all the way through. Rudolf Steiner, the great educator of the Steiner schools, speaks a lot about how every moment is an expansion and a contraction. As we breathe in, we're expanding, and as we breathe out, we're contracting. And we see that the days expand when the sun's out, and come nights, they shrink back down again. And this whole concept of how do we expand? We have to be willing to contract like nature does in order to expand again, and then be willing to contract again in order to expand again. So these camps that we create for these children, these young adults and their parents, are very much focused around creating a safe container within which these children can go through healthy, culturally appropriate, safe rites of passages to give them the possibility of getting that experience of contraction and coming through that challenge of pushing through something new. And it's in that beautiful space of that liminal space, as we talk about it, the space that the brain is in after we've gone through something very challenging, super open and receptive. It's like a whole skull gets compressed when we come through the birth canal, and then it's like, bang, it's on. Possibilities are available. Vision is available. We're connected to more parts of ourselves. We're more aware of things that we can let go of. We're not so stuck where we were, So we've got this expansion then after that stage of that process, with this liminal state of thinking, to really vision into who we are. What do we want to be in the world? What do we need to let go of? It's that all of that becomes possible when we practice this type of community living, this type of processing within ourselves collectively as communities who live together in different parts of the world. So it's beautiful work. Yeah.
Beautiful. I can see where it can be very charged and exhilarating to be part of it. What you're part of, you're continuous being a part of someone's transformation. And I just talked a moment ago how exciting that is. It's like I just imagine for you that you're constantly in the state of excitement as people are finding their new selves, if you will. And
totally.
It's a beautiful feeling.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of waves of emotion that are tied up in this type of work as well. I mean, I absolutely cannot, thank the way things have worked out, and whatever we'd like to call the mystery or God or the divine, or, whatever anybody feels comfortable with this mystery of how things seem to work and how things seem to work out, is that, my life is aligned now in the most extraordinary way. And I am living my best possible life, doing the most extraordinary work, living with the most amazing people, consciously co-creating possibilities for people to also come and find that type of space and that type of container within which they can transform. And, so it is an incredibly exciting, very alive experience that includes also the challenge of the sensitivity and the vulnerability and the tenderness that I see happen time after time when people go through transformations. These children that are going into young adulthood, and the parent who's observing that and then recognizing that they're also transitioning as an adult. and that there's something within them that, we kind of work at it at every angle, although we don't tell the parents that, don't tell anyone that, but, we work with the parents as well for them to be able to understand how they too need to change in order to be in right relationship to their changing young adult. And, so often there's this point in time in a parent's journey where they, say, we used to be so close, or you used to talk to me so much, or, dad's still saying to 14-year-old daughter, like, hi, my little girl. And she's like, I'm not your little girl anymore, and I'm not a girl, I'm a woman, but dad hasn't gone through his rite of passage into his mature parenting of a teenager. And so that relationship then kind of flounders, and dad's confused because he's not connected to daughter anymore, and daughter's like, dad doesn't get me. And we can see how these little social constructs kind of all start breaking down when we forget that we've got all of us on this ladder of age, on this unfolding, community of age, have responsibilities to each and every one of us to support each and everybody else's transitions. Otherwise, people get stuck. Daughter gets stuck as 14-year-old in dad's eyes, and it's like, she doesn't want to be stuck. She wants to continuously unfold into more of her brilliant self, her brilliant young womanhood self, So, to really be able to work with both parent and child and support them in understanding what is required, for me, is extraordinary transformational work. And off the back of the camps, I come back and my heart is like wide open. I'm quite emotional. I felt all the feels of the mothers letting go of their sons, or the fathers having big realizations, or the children recognizing how to show up as a better. And it's what would be termed like difficult emotion to be with. It's very intense, often quite filled with grief, and I work with the moms and their 10 to 14-year-old boys, those boys are changing and their moms are feeling it. And those moms have been wiping those boys' bums, and they've been feeding them and looking after them. And, there's this relationship that moms have with their sons. And I have a 9-year-old boy, so I'm kind of on the precipice of the beginning of this change. I listen to all these moms talking about their boy who's now going outward into the world, and they can feel them leaving. And it's this process as a parent of learning how to grieve the loss of that boy the way he once was, and the intimacy and the relationship the way it once was, in order to lay waste to that part that's still clinging to that child in that way, and to allow for that relationship to compost, to allow for this different, more mature relating field to form between the parent and the adolescent, to be able to be with them through this, incredibly important rite of passage into their young adulthood, where they're going to be faced with so much, in teenage years, so much. So, to keep that intimacy, there is this real sense of working with them all. And for me, very, beautifully transformational and emotive every single time. Oh
my gosh, yeah, it just sounds again, it's a wonderful journey to be a part of. It truly, truly, truly is. And as you're describing the different transitions that people can experience, at the back end of each one is something beautiful. It truly is. And perhaps in the moment, feel it, we might doubt it, we question it, but it is truly something beautiful, something to be a part of. And so I think that's a wonderful thing. You also work with female feminine leadership. I wonder if you sort of talk about that and how that incorporates into the work that you do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is one of my favorite topics. After spending 15 years in corporate banking and being a female leader within my organization, and looking after large teams and having that role of leadership, all the way through my very interesting and diverse career, I got the opportunity to have lots of different training courses and leadership training courses and all those types of things, that I would leave the training course with some really valuable information. I'd be like, wow, that's really great. That's practical. I can put that into action. I can do something about that. I can take that with me. And there was constantly, every time, this part of me that was like, something's missing. Like I've got a whole lot of great things, but it hasn't clicked. Like this whole conversation and contemplation for me of what is good leadership hasn't clicked into place, and I couldn't articulate what that was until I started asking myself the question of, what is female leadership? what does that mean? I mean, is it just because I'm a woman that I'm a female leader, or what are the qualities or the characteristics of the beauty of feminine leadership? What is the value of having a diverse group of men, women, minority groups, people of color, et cetera, et cetera? What's the value of this type of construct? Why is it important, And for me, in my own lived experience, the contemplation was it's important from a masculine, feminine point of view. For other people, it will be other intersectional challenges that are relevant to them, that they're exploring, that are going, this is relevant to me, so I'm going to explore why it's important, if that makes sense. Yeah. So, for me, I was like, why is this important? And I noticed that a lot of the languaging that got used was things around, the light feminine traits. Feminine leadership is about, good communication and empathy and compassion and, beautiful, wonderful traits. Love them, definitely want more of them. But within that conversation, there wasn't ever any conversations about what we could term the dark feminine traits. What about her power? What about that woman's power? If a woman's powerful in the corporate world, she's a bit overbearing, she's a bit too masculine.
Right.
She gets all these sorts of bits of feedback through her career. If she's in her feeling body, then she's a bit too emotional.
Right.
It's yeah. So it's like all these qualities of the feminine, which are big emotional. Our emotions are our feminine body, in both you and I, as human beings, as we both got these beautiful feeling beings. We're feeling beings. Our doing body, our masculine side, can go out there and make a plan and get things done and put one step in front of the other and pull together all the things and make it happen. And it's like, great, very practical, very necessary, very important. Let's make sure we do that well. And what about this feeling experience that we're having while we're doing all of those things? Each of us, man and woman, and everybody in between, has got a feminine side, which is our feeling body. And yet what we've allowed for in the space of our conversation and in the space of our corporate boardrooms is the light feminine traits of our feeling being. We're allowed to be compassionate and good communicators and empathetic and fabulous. Let's be all of those. But what about these dark feminine traits, the power, the emotion, the rage, the clarity, the drive, all these things that are unbecoming to a woman in our culture. Women are encouraged to be pretty pleasing and polite. And certainly for me, growing up as a little girl, it was, be a good girl and, do the right thing and, all that program, all beautiful things. But it didn't necessarily give me permission to be in the wholeness of my human experience when I started feeling things like anger or rage. It was like, too emotional, that's inappropriate. Don't feel those things, so, okay, I'll just push all of those feelings to the side, and as a result of this segregation for all of us of these parts of ourselves, we have landed up now having this enormous shadow of emotion that is now showing up in unhealthy ways in all of our lives, in mental health issues, in relationship abuse, in family breakdowns, in reactivity, in blaming, in pointing fingers, and all of that emotion that's bubbling inside of us individually and collectively is coming out in a punch, in a very unhealthy way. So this whole thing of feminine leadership for each and every one of us on the planet is like, oh, wow, in order to lead myself really healthily and well, and again, I'm going to use nature as our mirror, because nature is such an exquisite example of a mirror reflection for us human beings as a part of nature, is that, to move into this, how was it going to bring? I've just lost my train of thought on that.
The transition,
the transition. Sorry, feminine leadership. There we go. So in order to be able to move into the state where we are in our wholeness and being able to embody the whole of our experience, we have to allow to bring in and integrate these two sides of ourselves in a healthy way in order to not show up and in our lives, resulting in the negative impacts that we've seen in family structures and so on and so forth. And so for me, the work that I do with women, having discovered now this transition state that is necessary for us to be able to move into these dark, seemingly inverted commas, dark feminine traits, the parts of us that are angry and frustrated and irritable and haven't grieved the loss, haven't integrated that big experience that happened to us when we were 15 years old or 20 years old. We're still sitting with all of that in our shadow, in our being, and that's holding us back, not only from connecting to our own joy and being connected to what it is that's going to create that possibility of an audacious life for ourselves. We are also in then the elimination of that in the external wounding that we're unconsciously putting back out into the world through our own inability to be with this difficult, dark side of ourselves. And so the work I do with women is really starting to understand these parts of ourselves that are calling for our attention. Just because we're feeling angry doesn't mean I am an angry person or I'm an angry, I can go through that experience of feeling anger and allow for it to move through my body in a way that's healthy, in order for it not to be something that's stuck in me somewhere, some energetic contraction that's happened somewhere along the line. And we have this situation where we have a whole lot of people leading the world who are sitting on a whole bunch of undigested stuff. So all of that connection to really what's trying to arise for us collectively as a human family, which is a world envisioned in peace and harmony and interconnectivity and inclusivity, and all of those beautiful things that so many of us so deeply want, and yet we're not there because we're stuck in the wanting that but not digesting this. And our leaders are sitting there with this huge undigested bag of trauma, and then they're leading the world, and you wonder why we are not cohering collectively, because we're not cohering individually within ourselves into that experience of wholeness within ourselves. So the work I do with women brings in the ancient practices of rites of passage processes, which are very much focused around bringing people together and sitting in circle to be able to tell stories. There's this real beauty to sitting in circle and telling our stories, because a circle is a round circle. It carries on forever. Everybody's at eye level with one another. Nobody's up on a throne or at the head of the table. No hierarchy. It's total inclusivity. There's not some guru sitting on the stage bestowing wisdom. There's not some, somebody outside of ourselves that is greater or more evolved or better. The wisdom that comes through in the intimacy of the storytelling amongst others, when people are speaking authentically from the heart, being given the container within which they can speak about their experience that they're having in the moment, be it positive or challenging or grief-filled, from their heart in a really beautiful, authentic way. Everybody in the room is learning from the wisdom of that person's authentic lived experience. We don't need to have it all worked out and be a guru sitting, on a stage. We just have to be ourselves and connect to that, connect to that voice of our own, where we can speak our truth authentically and let that come out unfiltered, so that we can hear what's going on for ourselves and allow it to pass through us and be held in the sacredness of the circle, while people just reflectively listen. They don't run to save you or rescue you or make it go away or make it better or tell you it's going to be fine. They just let you have your experience so that can fully move through. And as the circle moves around and each person gets given an allocated time in that equality coming into it, in that equal measure, people have the opportunity to learn reflectively, because although your story, Audley, will be possibly very different, growing up where you've grown up and growing up where I've grown up, absolutely very different storylines. But if I talk to you about a moment in your life that brought you great joy and you share that with me, my joy is activated by your joy. It's like, wow, I can really feel you. Like the feeling of joy is common between us. There's no need for our stories to be of any significance.
The stories themselves the stories are almost irrelevant. We're talking about the feelings of energy and the joy. And in the very beginning, we talked about that, right? About how we can impact each other. And the piece for me, Paula, and sorry to interject, but I just love the aspect of sharing. I think there's so much value in sharing. So you're doing it in a circle. Everyone is free, honest, authentic, open environment, and they're just sharing. And there's tremendous power in sharing our stories, sharing our challenges, but not so much not that the focus is on the challenges, because where the real value is how I overcame the challenges. So if I'm going through my difficult period, and it's really easy for me to think that, when I'm going through something that no one in the world understands, no one can possibly conceptualize the feelings that I have. And all of a sudden someone goes, oh, well, this is what I went through. And here's my experience, but here's how I got through it. That is so empowering. And that comes, the foundational piece around that made that so powerful is the sharing aspect of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you see what happens, and you're so right, it's in that digestion, because as we share, we digest. And, the work I do with women is over a 10-week process where I take them on a curated, guided rite of passage journey on the circle experience to give them the opportunity to go through those stages of unpeeling the onion, of the speaking of the experience, to be able to get to that stage where it's like, oh, wow, I actually, in many instances, and I've seen this happen in the most extraordinary way, each circle has its own kind of, I want to call it a shamanic process in a way. It's like some other energy moves through and creates a thread and allows for that person's story to unlock, that person's experience to unlock, that person's fear. And it's like, I watch it. I mean, I get goosebumps as I think about it, because it's beyond me how that happens. It just, the co-creation of the medicine wheel happens without anybody in the circle even needing to know anything about it. It just happens. And in that curated journey, each prompt and each week is kind of seeking to unlock that potential that the circle holds. And then once it gets going, the women, go through, perhaps they're going through a big challenge in their life. Perhaps they're going through a big transition. More often than not, they come to a frequency circle when they are feeling that sense of wanting to transition. And so in that curated journey, that experience of the allowing of the safe space to be there for them to come into realization of the things that are calling for them to die, the ordeal that they're going through, the challenge. And it happens on that descent part of the circle to allow for them the ascent, where they're coming back out into this newness of this discovery of themselves, more aligned to their truth, more aligned to their values, more aligned to who they want to be and their vision for the future, more able to speak about the difficult experiences that have happened with much less reactivity, much less tears, much less emotion. There's more of a maturity that comes in the reflection back on the journey, to be able to say, wow, I actually moved through a whole lot of stuff there. That challenge, that ordeal has happened. And now I'm emerging out, and I can come back out now and tell the story in a different way. I don't need to tell it in that same way anymore. It's not contracted into that part that it was contracted into. It's got a little bit looser and a little bit freer. And now I'm emerging out in the newness, being able to now share a story that doesn't have that same frequency anymore. That vibration of pain or challenge has got lost, and I'm feeling lighter and freer.
It is. Oh, it so is. And again, the value of sharing, I do appreciate it. I'm glad you sort of touched on that. Paul, this has just been a wonderful conversation, and I do want to, before we wrap up here, I do want to talk about the value, and you did touch on very briefly on letting go, right? I truly believe that, in order to step into this new world and step into these new possibilities and the things that we're destined and supposed to, we've got to let go of what's holding us back over here. Because if we don't, then we can't get over there. And so I wonder if you could sort of touch on just the significance of that, because that's going to really block any sort of rite of passage or transformation that we take, because we're not letting go.
Yeah, you're spot on there. And it's so interesting, because we talk a lot about our languaging when we're talking about this type of work, myself and Anna, who I work very closely with. And, he's a man and I'm a woman, and we often come at it from slightly different angles. He talks about, and I think you even said, like mountain peaks and valleys, for example, and he talks about waves. And, I'm always talking to him about cycles, so I'm like, it's about the cycle of rebirth, death, rebirth again, it's about the cycle. And even when it comes to the words letting go, I like to use a word of integration, because in my experience, the letting go doesn't come from having something that gets dealt with and then gets like kind of let go of, it doesn't disappear. What happens is that in the cycle, it integrates back into oneself in a new way.
Gotcha.
And that only happens, that letting go, like you were saying, is only possible for the emergence of the new when we have unlocked the energy around these things that are causing contraction and causing us to hold on, causing us to stay stuck. When we go into that experiential journey of softening and letting go and feeling and allowing, there's like an unfolding, and it kind of integrates back in as wisdom, as like the teacher now for our next stage of our journey, because we have understood within ourselves that something needed to die in order to be reborn. So nothing needed to be cut off and thrown away. It just needed to be unlocked in order for us to be able to allow for the contracted energy around the experience to dissipate and to drop down into the fueling of the newness of the being for the next stage of our lives, and to have that experience and the awareness that that is what's happening in the moment helps us be so much more willing to turn towards the things that are holding us back in the future. To be able to go, oh, I'm feeling this sense of contraction. I want to move in that direction. And we're now like, oh, I'm being called for something to die. I'm being called to go into something difficult, and I've done this before. So I do know that this will, like all things, pass. I'm not going to be stuck in the darkness of the winter forever. Spring will come. Can I willingly now choose to turn towards that which is contracted in my life and allow myself to consciously choose to go there? Because if I don't choose to go there, life's going to grab me with it at some stage. It's going to come up in a really unhealthy way, So the more we practice this process and learn how to trust that next step is coming, that we are going to move out of winter, that the newness is going to arrive, but that's only going to be possible if we turn consciously towards that which is still contracted, and we give ourselves the best opportunity with the communities we've cultivated, the practices and processes we've learned, the enhanced awareness that we've gained from that last time we allowed the full death rebirth cycle to happen in our lives to fuel us. We are more willing. And then what happens, I've noticed, is that the transformations happen much faster. We don't get stuck in this prolonged period of challenge. It's like the willingness to go there. It's like, feel, do the thing, bang, wow. Whew,
that's right.
Free again to live more
because what happens is, because you've gone through it, right? You've gone through
Totally.
So it starts to become familiar, and the awkwardness, the uneasiness, the uncertainty about I don't know, maybe what happened, that all goes away, because it's like, I've done this before, let's just do it again, right?
Yeah, totally. Exactly. There's a trust that we develop with our own selves. We trust ourselves to know that this too shall pass because we've had it happen before. And that like intimacy of trust with self is something that a lot of people don't. We've placed our power outside of ourselves too much. I need a coach, I need a mentor, I need a parent, I need someone to save me, I need a prince on a white horse to come in and kiss me, so I'll be it's like all these external things we've been trained to rely on has resulted in us forgetting how to trust ourselves. And then it's so when we are aware in the process that we are feeding this next stage of our growth, that intimacy with ourselves, that self-knowing, that self-sourcedness starts to become more readily available. It's like, oh, wow, I've been here before. Can I turn towards it? Do I trust myself to do this? Am I safe? Have I built the capacity to do this? And it's like, yes, you have. Turn towards it. Everything turns out okay in the end. And it's like, oh, wow. I've just discovered something new again about myself and my capacity to do these things well. And and that's something that I'm passionate about, is building our capacity to live the more audacious life, to live the life that we are meant to live.
Oh, I love it. Paula, this is just so phenomenal. I mean, the work you're doing is fantastic. Helping people go through a very important rite of passage to their newness, their new selves, knowing that there's another one around the corner and there's another one down. Right? It's a continuous process, and helping people and working with people to go through that is absolutely phenomenal. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here, and the enlightenment has been absolutely wonderful. For listeners who undoubtedly appreciate everything that you've said and found enjoyment in that, if you could, and they wanted to catch up with you, where can we send them?
Yeah, beautiful. Best place to go would be my website, which is www.thefrequency.global. And they can book a discovery call with me via the website, and we can have a chat about whatever might be going on for them. So that would be the best place. They can also follow me on Instagram if they like. That's thefrequency.global. And the same for Facebook. And on LinkedIn, I'm Paula Conroy.
Awesome. Paula, thank you for doing this. This is so much fun. I'm glad we connected. I'm glad for the chat. I'm appreciative of the conversation and absolutely love the work that you're doing. So congratulations and keep it up.
Oh, thank you, Audley. And, I just love and honor you for creating this kind of space where stories can be shared. This intuitive side of you brought forth this beautiful podcast with amazing messages and incredible guests. And it's, I really honor that part of you, that you knew that this was a unique gift and talent of yours. And you've created such an amazing place for people to share their stories. So, honoring you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Paula. Be well and all the best. Take care. Back we are here on the podcast, and much thanks and appreciation goes out to Paula for stopping by and engaging in a very inspiring conversation. I really, really appreciate you, Paula, for being here. So thank you very, very much. I truly appreciated so much of what Paula had to share today with us. But if there's just one thing I take from our chat, it would have to be this. As we journey through life, transformation becomes an inherent part of our own personal growth. The evolution we all need to undergo to become better individuals involves understanding ourselves, challenging our beliefs, and embracing and change. In a constantly changing world, it's crucial to adapt and evolve to become the best version of ourselves. Here's 3 reasons how this evolution can positively impact our lives and the world around us. The very first step towards any sort of real transformation lies in self-reflection and awareness. Taking a deep dive into our thoughts, actions, and values allows us to understand who we truly are. Self-awareness enables us to identify our strengths and weaknesses, allowing us to work on them and grow in the process. Evolution requires us to challenge our existing belief systems and question our assumptions. It's super easy to become entrenched in our own perspectives, limiting our understanding of the world. But by actively seeking diverse viewpoints, engaging in constructive debates, and being open to new ideas, we facilitate personal growth and expand our worldview. Change is inevitable, and embracing it is essential for our personal evolution. Life presents us with numerous challenges that require us to adapt and adjust. By adopting a flexible mindset, we learn to let go of fear and resistance. We become more resilient, better equipped to handle uncertainty, and open to embracing new experiences and opportunities. Evolution requires a commitment to continuous learning and growth throughout our lives. By seeking knowledge and experiences outside our comfort zone, we enhance our understanding of the world while developing brand new skills. The evolution we all need to go through to transform into better individuals is a lifelong process. It requires self-reflection, challenging our beliefs, and embracing change while continuously learning in the process. By undertaking this transformation, not only do we enhance our personal growth, but we also create a ripple effect, positively influencing those around us. So let us embrace this journey of evolution to strive to become the best version of ourselves for the betterment of our lives, communities, and the entire world. Hey, listen, if you haven't registered for email notifications of the podcast, you can do so simply by registering over at bestaudaciouslife.com, and you'll be in the loop every time there's brand new content that comes out. We've sadly reached the end of another edition of the most audacious podcast the internet has to offer, and as always, I send my thanks and appreciation to all those lovers of audaciousness. It's because of you this podcast keeps on going. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.